My name is Austin Griggs, and I've worked at the Sheriff's Office for 20 years. And my current job is I am assigned to Department of Children and Family Services for security protection of their investigators in the field.
Can you tell us what motivated you to pursue a career in law enforcement?
I always wanted to help people. I know this is kind of a generic answer to why someone would become a police officer. Right out of high school, I enlisted in the Coast Guard, and I chose that path because I wanted to help people as well with the search and rescue and being able to, immediately help and respond to people having a kind of a bad day and needing help. So that's just when I got out of the Coast Guard, I wanted to continue to help people, and found law enforcement to be that path.
So I know you were a former canine officer. Could you tell us about your last dog you had?
My dog, I picked him up at the airport in Chicago in February of 2014. I knew nothing about the dog other than that he was pretty much already trained, and we just needed to finish off some training. And he came from Germany, so I picked him up at the airport, and that was like the very first kind of. I was a little hesitant because he didn't have a collar on, and he didn't know me, and I didn't know him. So I had to get him out of the crate to let him go to the bathroom. So that was like the very first stressful moment of being a canine handler. Is this dog going to bite me, or is he going to be friendly with me? My dog was trained in tracking, narcotics detection, and criminal apprehension. And I had a nice long career with him, almost 8 years working the street. He was a great dog.
Could you tell us what his name is?
Tim, kind of unique name for a canine. I could have changed the name, but my family thought it was kind of unique that we had a police dog named Tim, so we just left it Tim.
What specialized training or certification do you consider doing after firearms, crisis intervention, or defensive tactics?
So since I've been with the Sheriff's Office, I've been lucky enough to participate in quite a few different aspects of the job. I would say the very first specialty thing that I got to do was community policing. I got into the community policing right out of field training. I was the community police officer for Medina Township, and that entailed working with the community in that township, attending the county or the township board meetings. And while I was there, I started their first neighborhood watch in an area of the township that we were having a lot of vehicle burglaries and vandalisms and stuff like that going on. And that got a lot of participation in the neighborhood. I think we had maybe 15 people on the neighborhood watch, and they would go out. They created their own shift schedule that they would go out and either go for a walk or they would drive around. It was a very proactive neighborhood watch group, and with that, we reduced the number of vehicle burglaries significantly, and just the random vandalism, egg throwing, TPing, stuff like that. It was there were a great group of people to work with in those neighborhoods. From there, I just came back to general patrol and started with the bicycle team. Was the next kind of specialty thing that I got to join, and they work a lot of like parade events on mountain bikes. And in West Peoria would normally give us extra money to have bicycle patrol at night to help curb the similar thing as the neighborhood watch, but we got to do it in bikes, dark clothing, mountain bikes, catching people doing car burglaries and stuff like that. So after bike patrol, I was on trying to think what it was called back then, DIRT team, drug interdiction recovery team. That was extra guys that would get overtime to go work a detail together to swarm an area to just prevent violence and make traffic stops and try to get suspended drivers, drugs, weapons, things like that. And I stayed on that team throughout having my dog. It was kind of, if you had a dog, you were on the team. So we had a lot of extra overtime opportunities with the DIRT team. And I was also on the motorcycle unit. We had two Harley Davidson motorcycles and I joined that unit in 2012. And I went to the very difficult Northwestern University Motor Officer School. It was probably one of the hardest things I've done. It was 2 weeks of grueling, low speed, uh, serpentine courses and high speed braking and all of these different things that you had to be able to do on a motorcycle in order to pass the course. It took me the first full week to stop crashing my bike. I think I laid that bike down maybe 150 times in that first week of the school. Was very sore that one weekend we had off from lifting that bike up all by myself every time. And then I got to do some very cool things with the motorcycle unit, and one of those was the St. Jude Escort motorcycle ride from Walters Brothers here in Peoria to Memphis. That was fun. And then one of my most memorable things with that was we got down to Memphis, and they've got their own motorcycle unit that's much bigger than ours, and they had to do a funeral escort right after we did our escort to the hospital, and they asked us to ride with them for the funeral escort. And we could only do it if we had common communications. And with our new radios, we found a FEMA channel on all of our radios that we were able to talk to each other. So once we found out we had comms, we got to go ride with the Memphis guys to go do a funeral escort. That was pretty cool.
So what role did technology play into the rules of the business? Examples are body cameras and communication.
So when I started here 20 years ago, we were still handwriting our police reports. And now we're doing direct entry into the report writing system that can get sent straight to our supervisor for approval. Back when we were handwriting things, we'd have to meet up with our supervisor and hand them the piece of paper, and then if it was all messed up, they would go through just like turning in an English paper to your teacher. They would go through with their red pen and mark up all your mistakes and misspelled words, and then you'd have to go back and handwrite your report again. And if you had a DUI report, normally those are quite lengthy. You'd get to the end of your report and you'd reread it before you turn it in. You're like, oh man, I forgot. So you have this paragraph at the end of your DUI report that was all the stuff that you forgot to put in the very top, and then you just hope that you didn't have any errors, because those could be 4, 5, 6 pages long, and then you're having to handwrite all that stuff over again. And when I started, we also had the in-car cameras were VHS tapes in a vault box in your trunk, and now everything's digital. You just pull in the back parking lot, and it Bluetooths to your squad car and pulls your car camera video off. Body cams was a big thing. Tasers were a big thing. We didn't have tasers when I started. We didn't have body cams. The radios are half the size. My first radio was this big that I had on my uniform, and then it wouldn't work outside the car unless you hit a switch inside the car, and it would turn your car into a repeater so that your portable radio would bounce to your car, and then it would relay it to a tower. So if you forgot to hit your repeater button and you got out to chase somebody down, nobody could hear you because your radio didn't work unless your repeater was on. So we've advanced technology at the Sheriff's Department a lot in the last 20 years, with the basic in-car computers that we had 20 years ago to what we have now. It has made policing so much easier, including the body cameras. When it's on, anybody that wants to try to make a complaint, they can just pull up that footage, and it helps us 99.9% more than it hurts us. So they've been a great addition. And then the taser having that less lethal use of force option between mace and a baton. Just the advancement in technology has made the job more efficient. I wouldn't say the job is any easier than it was 20 years ago, but it's made it more efficient.
The taser and the body cam help you become more safe.
I would not say that either of those made me more safe. It just gave me more tools to the toolbox.
To help protect you from whatever, instead of falling.
Yeah, the body camera is definitely it's given us better protection against complaints, baseless complaints. And then the taser is, like I said, it's just another option for less lethal. I've only used my taser 3 times since I've been issued it.
What was some of the most difficult or emotional challenging aspects of your job?
What was the question?
It's what was some of the most difficult or emotional challenging aspects?
Most difficult or emotional challenging aspects. I would say the job in general, as far as difficult and emotional challenging aspects, like the stuff that we see on a daily basis in law enforcement, and I would say even in the firefighters and the EMTs. Um, you read some books on psychology and things like that. If you look at a law enforcement officer's career, I forget what the number is, but it's so many more times more than a general public person is supposed to either traumatic event or they say adrenaline type rush, any of those events. We go through that high and low cycle every day where an average person might only go through like an adrenaline cycle maybe once every couple weeks. Unless you're an athlete playing a sport, you get those adrenaline spikes, and our bodies go through it maybe 4 or 5 times a day, depending on your calls for service and what type of calls they are. And you span that over a 20-year period, it takes a toll on your body because we're really not built to have that continued increase dump of adrenaline and emotion, and then you have a period of nothing, and then an instant spike, and then a period of nothing, and an instant spike. So um, the job itself, the difficult challenges we face, um, you also have to include that on the family as well. You know, when you're a young officer, you're for the most part newly married, kids start coming, and you're in that time frame of you miss a lot of family stuff. When, until you have some seniority, you're working every holiday. You're missing sporting events for your kids' stuff. You're not able to coach their. If you wanted to coach their youth sports, it's almost impossible to do. So there's the difficult and emotional aspect of just every part of the job. It tears you in different directions. So I mean, the job itself and the time that you stay in it just further becomes more difficult and more draining on your system.
What types of calls and situations do you respond to most frequently during your time?
Most frequent calls: domestic disputes is probably one of the staple calls that law enforcement gets the most. Um, and then I would say theft calls, and then maybe traffic crashes.
Can you describe a typical day?
There, there's no typical day. That's the best part of law enforcement is you could have 3 days of nothing and then one day of pure hell where you don't get a lunch break, you barely get a bathroom break, and the radio is nonstop, and you just have no time to do anything. There's nothing routine about law enforcement, and there's nothing generalized about it. You can't generalize a typical day because you just don't know. You could. Unfortunately, there's some officers that as soon as they signed on the radio, they started their day with an active shooter somewhere. So I mean, it's just that's the benefit of you know the job, if you like the adventure, if you like the unknown of how your day is going to go. Public service, such as fire department, EMT, police, would be right up there because your day is unknown from the time you sign on until the time you sign off.
How long was the longest day?
My longest day I ever had, I would say, I think it was the December 1st snowstorm of 2007. We got like 2 feet of snow overnight. I was working second shift, and I got forced over onto thirds. The third shifter called in sick, and I was up for the force. So I got forced for all of third shift, and I was the last car at like 4 o'clock in the morning that was not stuck. I was the only squad car on shift that wasn't stuck in the snow somewhere. And they tried to send me out to a stranded motorist on Route 150. And I had a front wheel drive, I think it was a 2005 Impala. And I made it to the off ramp of 150, Route 150 at Route 6. And I came up to the intersection and just, there I was, stuck in the middle of the intersection. Couldn't go anywhere. And by the time I got home, I think I got home at 11:30 in the morning, and I had gone to work at 2:30 in the afternoon the previous day. So I was in my squad car from 2:30 p.m. the previous day till 11:30 noon, and that was just. If I got towed out to a freshly plowed 150 by a county snowplow, and then the only thing that was plowed was basically Ward Drive from Route 6 to the mall. So all I could do was just basically do a loop. You couldn't pull into a parking lot because none of the parking lots were done yet. So I basically just kind of did a loop. I remember I did a traffic stop on a city snowplow and went up to the guy's window and I said, look, I've been at work since 2:30 yesterday afternoon. My in-laws live a half a mile away that way. Can you just plow me to my in-laws' house so that I can go to sleep? And he says, sorry, sir, that's not my route. Get off my truck. So I just continued to do that loop until the loop got a little farther and I got from Sterling and Ward Drive down to Farmington Road. And then I kind of did a loop, and then within another 40 minutes I could make it out to, we were living in Hannah City at the time. I was finally able to make it to Hannah City, and I pulled over a guy who was plowing driveways. And I said, I don't care how much it costs, plow my driveway right now. I will pay you in cash. I want to go to bed. So he drove to my house and did one path down my long driveway and just left this big pile of snow in front of my garage door. And I was able to pull the squad car in, shut it off, and I was supposed to be back at work at 2:30. So I called the supervisor. I said, hey, I just got off. They're like, yeah, we know. I was like, well, I'm supposed to be back on at 2:30. They're like, yeah, we're looking at the schedule. Why don't you come in at 6:30? I was like, done. So that was my longest day in police work, was that snowstorm.
What kind of vehicle do you drive, and what makes it unique to the sheriff's office?
I drive the worst squad car I've ever driven in 20 years, which is a hybrid Ford Explorer. I hate that thing
Why do you dislike it so much?
because it kicks in and out of electric and hybrid. So it's like under 30 miles an hour, it's off. The engine's not running. You're just running on electric. And then if you need to go somewhere and you put the gas to it, it shifts you almost out of your seat. It is not a true hybrid vehicle. Should probably not be a police car. I've driven Impalas. I've driven Crown Vics. I've driven Tahoes and Explorers, and I would say that this hybrid Explorer is the worst thing I've ever driven. But they assigned it to me, so I'll drive it.
Can you tell us how you became involved in Canada
Before I joined the sheriff's department, I had a lab that I used for duck hunting, and I trained that dog myself and ran that dog in field trials during the summertime to keep her conditioned for duck hunting. And when I saw the canine unit and what those guys were doing with their dogs, I was like, you know what? I really enjoyed training my hunting dog and working with my hunting dog. Um, I'd like to do that. And when I was first in the Coast Guard, we did a lot of drug interdiction, and I really enjoyed drug interdiction work that we did in the Coast Guard. And I was like, well, if I had a dog, I'd get to do drug interdiction. So I tried out for it. I think it was the third time I tried out for it is when I finally got selected. So it took a couple tries because you're interviewing against other candidates, and you just, sometimes you got to wait your turn. I'm really happy with the dog that I was selected for. The most rewarding part was being able to provide a service to, you weren't only helping the public, but you were helping your fellow officers. The dog was a tool for all of the other officers to use, and I focused on making sure that I trained my dog to the best of our abilities to work as a team, so that when we were called to help another officer and they found out that they were getting me and my dog, they were excited. Hey, this is a good dog. This is a good team. We're gonna get positive results for it. And I feel that by the time I retired my dog, we'd achieved that. We were a team that everybody wanted to use. If we were coming to help you, everybody had that positive. Hey, he's found quite a few people for us that ran. Um, and I said that I wanted to get the dog for drug interdiction, and by the time I was done working my dog, I didn't really care about the narcotics enforcement. I was driven in the tracking, the tracking and apprehension of criminals. I could have cared less to run my dog for another drug sniff. I was just jonesing for that next call for service where we would get to track somebody and try to find him. I mean, he became a very, very good tracking dog, and he was a lot of fun to work. Yeah, Creve Coeur one night was chasing a stolen car, and they chased it into Peoria, and it wrecked on North Street by the Dry Run Creek. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dry Run Creek. It's the creek that runs into the middle of 74. So you've got that space in between 74 from like University to Knoxville that's got that drainage ditch in the middle of it. So there was two people in the car. When it rolled, a gun fell out of the car. It was laying in the middle of the street when we got there. And then we were told that one guy ran and they apprehended him, but there was another guy that ran as well. So I got my dog out and started tracking, and we ended up in that Dry Run Creek bed, and we ran all the way down to where it goes under 74. So the creek will run under 74, and then it dumps out into Lower Bradley Park. So I get into the overpass section, so we're underneath the interstate, and there's no lights, it's super dark, it's nighttime, and now we've encountered standing water. And I know from other experiences in the park that that's kind of like a dam that flows out the end and kind of drops off into the creek, and then it goes to the park. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to give a canine warning before I start going into the standing water. It was like December, I think it was. I said, before I go into the standing water, I'm going to make a canine announcement, because if I can get this guy to give up without getting wet, I'm all about it. So I amp the dog up, and he's barking, and it's just this deafening, echoing bark inside this, almost like a cave. And I hear this guy, I'm right here. Don't send your dog out. And I get my flashlight out, and he is almost chest deep in water. And he comes walking out with his hands up. Well, when we came out from underneath of that overpass area. The dog was doing a rear transport, so he was barking at the guy, and the guy was in handcuffs, and he was walking in front of the dog, so we were kind of marching him out. They call it a rear transport. And then I look up, and both shoulders looking down into the ravine was like 15 to 20 police officers just cheering that we got this guy. I'll never forget everybody screaming, good dog, Tim, good job, Griggs. It was just one of those. You look up and it's just all these guys are just cheering on the dog. I was like, yeah, that makes you feel good. What's that? What call sticks with me the most? There's so many calls that you can remember that always stick out. I mean, there's not. I can't forget the sound of. We worked a traffic crash, and it was a head-on collision west of Chillicothe. The impact wrapped the driver, the one driver's foot and ankle around the brake pedal metal. The only way to get her out of the car was to sawzall the brake pedal off the car. And the vibrations from the sawzall into the brake pedal metal was just vibrating her broken bones up her leg. Her screams from pain, I will probably never forget. Because there was no other way. It was pretty hair-raising, the screams. And then, you see so many dead bodies with this job. There was a dead body in a car just a couple years ago where you could see the maggots under the skin, and it made it look like his head and neck were moving. It made it look like he was still alive, but it was just the amount of insects that were just under the thin layer of skin. So yeah, there's stuff that we see that people shouldn't see, and a lot of those stick with you. The two biggest calls I worked with my canine were tracking and free air narcotic sniff on traffic stops. So a fellow officer pulls over a car, and then they have, during their traffic stop, have developed some reasonable suspicion to believe that there might be narcotics in the car, and they would call for a canine walk around, and that would just be that I walk my dog around their car, and if the dog detects the odor of narcotics, he gives the trained response, which my dog was trained in a aggressive response, which was scratching at the source of the odor. And my dog learned very quickly that the quickest place to find odor was door handles, because let's face it, you go buy drugs from a drug house, you're not exactly washing your hands after you stick it in your pocket. So they would have the residue on their hands, and then they go get in their car. So probably 3 years into working, maybe not even that, when we would do a walk around on a car, Tim would just walk up and he'd stick his nose right under the door handle, and then he'd go to the next door handle, and then he'd walk around the other side of the car, door handle. So the first thing he checked was the door handles on every single car, because he quickly learned that that's where he would find the odor the most. And it was not something that we trained. It was just something that he developed on his own of, hey, when I smell it on these door handles, it's easier than taking the long way of sniffing every seam along the bottom of the car. He just goes to the door hand. He just would go to the door handles.
What advice would you give someone considering doing canine unit?
There are some books out there on dog handling and canine behavior, and I would say if you have time, get a dog of your own and just start from the basics of learning basic obedience and getting your dog trained up in some type of event. Train your dog in obedience and then train your dog to do something other than that as well. And you get that experience, and then when you go into your interview, you can say, hey, look, I have a dog, whether it's a lab or it could be any dog. I mean, there's so many different things from antler shed hunting to fast cat races, and like my current German Shepherd does dock diving. There's so many arrays to do that. So if you go into your interview, say, look, I've read these publications, I've trained a dog in obedience, and we do this type of competition. That would give you a leg up over somebody who hasn't, maybe has a dog at home, but it's not, it's just a pet dog, and they're not really doing anything with it. It just kind of, goes out in the backyard, plays frisbee, and comes back in. And then the other, you have to be a solid police officer too. You have to have the foundations of doing solid police work, so that you're that good quality candidate.
How would you coordinate with other agencies when pursuing a fugitive with your dog?
So you would always have someone from that agency with you, and then we always took one of our own. So if I went on a track outside of Peoria County, it would be myself, one of my other fellow deputies from Peoria County, and then someone from that agency. So I would always get on scene. I would get briefed by whoever initiated the contact with the suspect, get a reasonable last known location of where I would try to start my dog to then start the track. So you always take someone with you from that agency. So, you might not be familiar with the area. I'd been called to track up in Stark County. I had been called into Tazewell County, places in Woodford County, and Peoria City a lot. We did a lot of tracking in the city of Peoria. But you always have one of their people with you to help with that communication.
Clothing sessions. If you could have any piece of equipment you control, car, what would it be?
If I could have any piece of, what would I put on my patrol car that I don't already have? I would say the hard plastic seats for the prisoner transport. We've never had those. So you got to pop your seat out to look to see if anybody stuffed anything under there. And if we went to the hard plastic seats that have no seam, they're in the seat. If they defecate or urinate themselves, it's easy to clean. And then there's no place for them to hide contraband in the back of your squad car if it's a molded, hard plastic seat that's back there. A lot of agencies have them. We've never had them, and sometimes people try to stuff stuff in between your seat cushions and under the seats and things like that. And then you've got to pull the seats out and look for stuff. So I think if I had to add anything, I would say the hard plastic seats.
One vehicle to drive, what would it be? And would it be marked or unmarked?
Ooh, marked with slick top. Marked with a slick top, and I would have to say the rear wheel drive only Pursuit package Chevy Tahoe. That was I had that as one of my canine cars before I got my four wheel drive Tahoe, and that 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 Tahoe was probably the best squad car I've ever had. It was a rear wheel drive only Pursuit package Tahoe with the sport suspension on it. That thing was fast, it was stable, and it didn't break down a lot until it got later in its years. I mean, they just retired that car this year, and it had 200 and some thousand miles on it.
So when you retire from Canada, do they give the car you use for the next year?
Yeah, they did. Yep.
One of my questions is, what equipment do you carry
On a day to day, the standard equipment, which would be radio, taser, extra mags, my pepper spray, flashlight, and baton and pistol. That's the standard that you have to carry. I also carry. Well, you don't have to carry a flashlight, but I always have a flashlight on me because you never know. Middle of the daytime, you could end up in a basement with no power. So one thing I learned early on was to carry a flashlight, maybe an extra flashlight, handcuff key. Uh, I carry a straight blade knife on my vest carrier because you just never know. You have all these tools on your tool belt. It's just one more. Um, I that's just another. If I'm wrestling for my life and I cannot get to my firearm, there's one other thing that I can get to, and I always carry a folding knife as well. Plus the med pouch. With today's law enforcement and active shooters and things, I carry a tourniquet in one of my pockets on my pants, and there's also a tourniquet as well as a mass bandage on my kit as well. So 2 tourniquets and a big dressing bandage.
If you could one piece of equipment to your day-to-day carrying, what would it be?
Add one piece of equipment to my everyday carry.
You can also enhance a item that you wear.
Enhance an item that I wear. I think for speed and efficiency, I would like to be able to carry a spare mag for my AR on my external carrier, but currently we're not allowed to carry an AR pouch on our vests, just our pistol pouches.
One, two questions. If you could have gone into any special division in the sheriff's office, what would it be? If it were a special operation.
If I could, I've done quite a bit. I tried out for our emergency response team, our equivalent to SWAT, and didn't get selected. And I wish I would have tried other attempts to get on there. But I ended up getting the dog. So the other times that I could have tried, I still had the dog. And at the time, at the time you couldn't have a dog and be on the team at the same time. So that has since changed. We do have members that are on the team with a dog. So I wish I would have tried out for that other times to be on our CERT team.
But with on the team with your dog, because I know some departments would like dogs.
We had dogs when I had my dog. There were other members on the team that had dogs, so they didn't need another dog on the team. I don't believe, but at that time I was told that you couldn't have a dog on the team.
So thank you for your time. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't think so.